First of all, I will talk about the player character. Um, I'll start talking about the header files. They are used to declare functions and variables, and it's very often that they are used to create pointers to a component that will be referenced later on. For instance, the pistol component and the shotgun component, which are my own custom actor components, which I wrote myself. Um, Next, I'll move on to the input binding setup. Um, this is done in its own function, and you either bind via the axis or via an action input, which is assigned to a button in the project folders. And this basically will assign itself to the function. So it will call that function whenever that button is pressed. There's also examples of the move right and move forward code. I'll next talk about the constructor in yellow. This is where you create default subobjects for the components, which will basically add them. You can also set the relative location of each component. For instance, the camera location is not 0, 0. It's very slightly up, plus the base eye height. It also, the camera component will use the control rotation of the pawn, so it follows wherever the player is looking. It also adds a mesh, which is just a skeletal mesh of the first person. It adds the arms of the mesh as well, and hides the full mesh, but only shows the arms to the owning player, which basically is just for it's just for multiplayer purposes. And then it also checks that the pistol and shotgun components aren't null pointers and adds those as well, and just sets a variable which was created in the header to use pistol and health. Next, I'll be talking about the weapon functions, which are in blue. This is where the components are called. So when you press a button to switch to the pistol, it will deactivate the shotgun component and activate the pistol component. Or when you swap to the shotgun, it'll do the opposite. And then when you press fire, it will check if use pistol is true. And if not, then it'll use the shotgun one. And if it is, then it'll use the pistol one. Just to make sure that it's not using the wrong one every time. These are the weapon components that I was talking about. The header for the pistol component, the only major difference is that I've created a function called trace beam, which is the line trace shoot. In the weapon component, the shoot function, how it does it is it gets a camera manager first. It creates a pointer and then gets it from the first person controller and creates a hit result local variable. It then uses the camera location, the camera manager, to get the rotation and location. The start location and the end location of the line trace. It will then call the line trace, and if it has hit anything, then it will check that what it's hit is the enemy character, and if so, it'll deal damage to that actor that has been hit. The shotgun component is very similar. Once again, in the header file, the only thing that's been changed is the shoot being declared. And in the shooting function, it differs a little bit because what it does is it makes 10 line traces with different angles between them, which is why I've got an addition vector set up in the header. And what that does is it'll do a random X, Y, and Z coordinate. And it will set the addition vector as those X, Y, and Z coordinates, and set the addition vector as the end point. Yeah. So it does 10 lines from the player forward with like a set spread. So it creates the shotgun mechanic. And once again, if it hits anything again, it'll check it was an enemy character, and if so, it'll deal damage. Now moving on to the enemy character. One of the main issues I ran into was a circular dependency issue, which is basically when you reference header files in two separate places. So what I was running into was I wanted to get the character header file, the reference to the character, but the character already had references to the enemy character through the components headers, which was causing problems. So how I got around that was in the header of the enemy character, I just put class and then the name of the character class to make sure that it knew it was going to exist at some point. And then in the C++ file, I included the header in there instead of in the enemy's header. Yeah. Once again, the header file just creates variables that need to be used later and pointers to components that will need to be used. In the constructor and begin play, once again, the constructor it creates the components by adding subobjects. One of the important parts about this is it creates a root component as well, because one of the issues I was getting was the collision box for hitting the enemy was set to 0, and it wasn't sticking to the enemy character. It was just constantly sat on 0, which was causing issues. So adding a root component and attaching it to the root component helped fix that issue. Another thing with begin play is I had to use a delegate to basically make it so that when the thing is overlapped, it will call the begin overlap function, because that's not done automatically. And then the take damage function is it'll just take the health and take one away from it, which is an input from the weapon before. And if the health is less than or equal to 0, it'll destroy. On the begin overlap, what it does is when it's overlapped, it'll check if the actor that was hit is the player character, and if it is, then it'll deal damage to the player character. Next, I've got the enemy spawner. Once again, the header file just creates references and spawn locations. On the constructor and begin play, once again, the constructor just creates the components. Begin play is more important because I was having issues with things not spawning, the enemies not spawning. No, they were spawning, but they were spawning at 0 once again. And I tried creating a root component, which wasn't the issue. The problem was that I was trying to get the location in the constructor instead of on begin play. So getting the location in begin play spawned the enemy at the location of the box instead of just at 0, because I assume it couldn't get the location on construction. And then the on tick, that's just set a timer for 20 seconds. So it'll just spawn an enemy every 20 seconds. The spawn enemy function is it gets spawn parameters. I also did always spawn because I was running into issues with it just not spawning at all. So making the spawn parameters always spawn helped fix that. Then through the world, you just call the spawn actor, and if it is spawned, if the pointer's not a null, then it will add the default controller to it, which adds the AI to it.